Okay, we're recording. So hi, everyone. With us today, we have Michael Hund. He is the CEO of EB Research Partnership, a game-changing medical research organization dedicated to curing the life-threatening genetic skin disease, Epidermolysis Bullosa, and
Nailed it.
pioneer. Did I say it right?
You got it.
And pioneering the innovative business model of venture philanthropy. Michael has spent his career dedicated to transforming healthcare. He received his BA in philosophy from the University of Kansas, CORE credential from Harvard Business School, and MBA from the Yale School of Management. He now specializes in entrepreneurship, venture capital, medical research, clinical trials, and digital health. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, so I guess I can start out with the questions, and if anyone else has questions, please jump in. I guess the first question is, what has led you to and continues to drive your passion as an impactful leader in your organization dedicated to curing the skin disease, Epidermolysis bullosa?
By the way, you did a phenomenal job, pronounced it perfectly, but for our purposes, for you and I both, we can say EB for
EB?
short. How about that? That's fair deal.
Amazing.
Well, it's a great question, and it's sort of all of our origin story to think about, right? Like what drove us into the field. So, for me personally, I grew up on a 1,000-acre cattle ranch in Kansas, an incredibly rural area, and I learned about a camp in rural Connecticut, not far from Yale, called the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp. And it was a camp for children with serious illness. So, young people who battled cancer, sickle cell, HIV, really devastating disease. So one, year I got in my truck, I drove across the country and I volunteered at this camp when I was 18 years old. And it completely changed my life. I was on my way to law school. I probably would have been a lawyer, today and working the weekend on some case in New York City, but, it completely changed the course of my life because working with young people who battle disease teaches you a lot about bravery, courage, selflessness, and really just made me want to have a larger purpose with my life. And right there, I knew this is a community that I want to work with. So I worked for that organization for a decade. Was a phenomenal organization and provided a camping experience for kids that spent 200 days out of the year in a hospital, allowed them to be kids, ride horses, go fishing in a medically safe, medically secure environment, but most importantly, build a sense of community, right? I'm not the only one with pediatric cancer. I'm not the only one with HIV AIDS. Somebody who, had beat leukemia could talk to somebody who was just diagnosed with leukemia. It was really powerful. But one of the problems I became fixated on was the root of disease itself. So the unfortunate part about, any job working in pediatric disease, particularly life-threatening disease, is the loss of life. And after experiencing, the seeing what families went through when they lost a loved one or a young person from a serious illness, it made me want to go towards the root of that problem, which is disease itself. So shortly after that, I went to work for a cancer organization called Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. And the founder was a woman named Kathy Giusti. She was a Harvard Business School grad. And, she was diagnosed with this fatal cancer, had a 1-year-old child, and was given a year to live. They said, get your affairs in order. Unfortunately, this is very fatal and very deadly. She said, I don't accept that fate. And she had worked in the pharmaceutical world, again, went to Harvard Business School. And she said, I believe that nonprofit medical research foundations should be run like businesses. And so she ran the foundation like a business. During my time there, we saw 10 FDA approved treatments for multiple myeloma. We launched a 1,000-patient longitudinal genomic study, the largest of its kind in cancer at the time, even for a rare blood cancer. And most importantly, we saw the tripling of patient life expectancy, all from taking this business-like approach to curing disease, to running a medical research foundation in the same way that a Fortune 500 company would. So, through that experience, I decided I wanted to go get an MBA and focus on the business of healthcare, and ended up at the same alma mater as you at Yale School of Management on their healthcare program. And the problem that I really wanted to solve was, how can we make cures move faster? How can we cure disease faster? And, part of the answer is you have to evaluate the stakeholders, right? Which, ultimately have same goals, which is results, therapeutics, ultimately cures. but have very different ways in which they approach those goals and operate in business plans, right? So you start breaking down the stakeholders group. You have patients and families who disease impacts, right? You've got industry, meaning not only biotech and pharmaceutical companies, but the regulators like the FDA. And then you have academic medicine, clinicians who see patients directly, and then researchers who are working in a lab, right, to make breakthroughs in disease. So how do you unite those disparate stakeholder groups to make things move faster? So I started writing a lot about new investment models and impact investment funds, venture philanthropy. How can patients take a role in the driver's seat? Not just to advocate in Washington, D.C., or write letters, like how can they actually be part of the business of advancing treatments and cures for diseases? So it was through that experience I learned about EB Research Partnership, where I'm CEO now. And EB Research Partnership's mission is very simple. How can we, as quickly as possible and relentlessly, cure EB? And EB, Epidermolysis Bullosa, is a very rare pediatric skin disease, incredibly life-threatening. Kids every single day are in full body bandages, bleach baths. It's an awful disease, but it's monogenic. So it's caused by one genetic mutation. We know that genetic mutation. So I get up every day and say, the possibility that we can actually cure this disease and end that pain and suffering, not only in my lifetime, but before the end of this decade, is realistic. And that's not just shared by me. That's PhDs and MDs working in the space that we speak with every single day. So because we're monogenic, we fund research in areas like gene editing, exon skipping, sRNA treatments, similar to what we're seeing to COVID today. And the hypothesis is since we know that genetic mutation, we can fix it with things like spray on skin, which sounds more like science fiction than science, but it's a technology we invest in. So our business model, which I think is different, is we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We raise money from donors, from patients, from families. But the way in which we're different, it depends on how we fund that research, right? So we've funded over 90 research projects since we started 10 years ago, and we've seen real impact. 10 years ago, there was 2 clinical trials in EB. Today, there's more than 30, and we have 4 phase 3 clinical trials. So there's currently no approved treatments, but those 4 phase 3 clinical trials have happened within the last year, right? So you're seeing more than 10 times the amount of clinical trials in a decade, which, if you know about medical research and rare disease, and a tremendous amount of progress, because we've created a business model to fund and sustain that. So what's that business model? How does venture philanthropy work? So once we raise dollars, again, as a nonprofit, the way in which we fund is we source applications from the world. We fund projects in 9 different countries last year across the globe. Who's got the best idea to cure this disease or have a meaningful treatment? But then when we make decisions, we become venture capitalists, right? So we're sourcing projects. When we fund a project, we negotiate venture capital deals. So we have some equity stake, right, in those companies. So if they become commercially successful, whether they're bought by a pharmaceutical company, or the company goes public, or they have an approved drug, the return on investment comes back to us as a foundation to fund more research until we cure the disease. So, ROI for us is more like return on impact of not only, de-risking early stage investments in rare disease, but by creating a sustainable funding model. So to give you an example, there was a project at a West Coast prominent university, gene therapy project. We put $500,000 into that. PhD researcher working on that in a lab. 3 years after that, it was acquired by a pharmaceutical company because of the equity stake we took. When we made that funding, again, as a foundation, we generated a 6x return, turned that 500,000 into 3 million. That 3 million comes back to the foundation for us, again, to fund more research until the disease is cured. The last 2 years, we've evolved that model where we've started to not only fund academic medical centers, but we fund companies, private or public, biotech companies. But also, the last few years, we've started our own companies. So we've started 4 companies in the last 2 years where we bring in management teams, fund them, take an equity stake. And really, why do we do all this? To make the process move faster, to find cures to disease. So, I'm sure that was maybe a longer answer than you expected, but, you can see me smiling because it's rooted in being changed at 18 years old, of being exposed to pediatric disease and wanting to do something about it. But solving that problem with a business model and an innovative way to fund and invest, and also meet the needs of the unique stakeholders that are involved in healthcare.
Incredible. What you're doing is incredible. I guess for the members here, we have a question of what are some critical questions that entrepreneurs need to ask themselves while starting a business?
I think, if I give you sort of the MBA Porter's five forces, I'll try to, mix a little bit of what you'd read in a textbook in business school, but what's the practical reality? So, when we get applications to fund companies from a venture perspective, what are we looking for, right? So I think, first of all, you cannot ever underestimate people. It sounds so simple, but in my experience of companies that have succeeded and companies that have failed, it really is rooted in the people. So what is the leadership team? Exactly your first question, what motivates you? Why are you passionate about the work that you do? Because I have to know as an investor, I'm putting my dollars into this. What is keeping you invested in this company? Why are you thinking about this company in the morning when you get up before you have your coffee? What's going to keep you focused on this endeavor? If you have the talent, what's going to keep you focused on this endeavor to secure my investment and success in the company? So, the passion of the team, the expertise. I think diversity is incredibly important for teams, especially startups. And I mean that in every sense of the word, right? You want a diverse group of thinkers from different backgrounds where, if I'm funding a startup with a management team of only 6 people, I want to know that those 6 people have unique points of view and bring unique differentiated opinions to the table, because innovation is born out of the difference of ideas and the difference of backgrounds and the difference of perspectives. So a strong team, but a diverse team is incredibly important when a funder says, can this succeed? Can it not? And part of that's rooted in the experience they have, but I think I would put equal weight on the passion they have to really drive this forward and give me as an investor confidence that they're going to bring that to completion. I think, having a project that's differentiated is incredibly important for the theme for this week, right? Big data and technology and healthcare. Why is your company, why is your product not going to be gobbled up by Google Health or AWS Healthcare? Or Facebook now, right? Who's venturing into healthcare. All of the big 3 tech companies now have healthcare lines. So why is it differentiated? And the answer could be it's differentiated enough that I'm going to be acquired by one of those companies, but for a significant investment. What makes unique? What's your market advantage? What's your competitive advantage? Addressable market, what's the market size? So as an investor, from a pure economics perspective, you're looking for return on investment. How much of a return on investment it will get, and how quickly, right? So that has everything to do with market. If it's a rare disease, then there's a cap, there's a ceiling to that market, right? There's only X amount of patients. So is your company, a rare disease company that is first targeting this unique rare disease, right? That's incredibly important. What are the barriers to entry to the market? Do the big technology companies have a lock? When we think about healthcare, what do clinicians use? They use either Epic or Cerner, maybe Athena Health, right? So if you're pitching a product to innovate EHRs, why would Athena or Epic or Cerner not do it? And what value add do you have to the existing players in the space? So, that's just a couple things. I think, when we see later stage companies, culture is incredibly important, but that goes back to the team. What type of culture are they fostering? I think when we talk about digital health companies and sustainability, what I've learned, so I actually launched a new initiative with Amazon Web Services. And if anybody's interested, I just did an interview with the AWS Innovation Ambassadors podcast that you can listen to. But, basically we're doing a direct to patient data platform where we're going to all the ED patients in the world, then scaling up to rare disease to say, it can be difficult to obtain and share data through an academic medical center infrastructure. So now we're going to you as patients to source data from you directly. You can choose to provide a genomic sequence sample, right? And you can choose where that's shared, whether you want to share it to academic medical centers, to clinical trials, to companies who are working on the space, really giving that power back to patients. And I think when you're starting companies in healthcare, an important lesson to understand is it's different than a transportation app or a food app or an IoT app, in the sense that, we can dream big in healthcare, which we always should, but we also have to be aware of the current infrastructure, which is healthcare is slow and steady for a reason, right? Why have we not seen more digital disruption in the healthcare space? Well, we have HIPAA compliance, we have FDA guidelines, we have a publisher parish academic medical center culture, which is good, but oftentimes, doesn't incentivize quick movement in the way that a technology company works. So I think one of my lessons of starting a company with Amazon is that, it wasn't to say academia moved as fast as Amazon, but it was very much academia. Can we move a little bit closer to that pace of Amazon? And can we approach a patient's journey with their disease in the same way that they approach a user journey? So I think that's another really big opportunity for healthcare companies and entrepreneurs today, is making them patient-centered. I think there's a large place in the market for patient-centered, patient-powered, patient-valued companies in the healthcare space. And that's not only because it's the right thing to do for patients, but additionally, the FDA and regulators want to know how the patients feel, want to know the patient's perspective. And I think we're at a point where, we'll always need clinicians and PhD researchers, but many times, specifically in rare disease, patients have an incredible amount of insight to offer about their disease that you may not find in an EHR or clinical report, right? So just, those are a couple quick things, if that's helpful.
Cool. Can I ask a question?
Sure, of course. Would love that.
Hi, my name is Umbreen. I'm actually a pediatrician. So I caught my eye or ear, I guess, when you said you'd had experience with pediatric disease, because I joined a little bit later. So I just be curious for a quick recap of that. But I wanted to just ask, in part, I think because I think what we're going to pitch to later tomorrow a little bit falls in the space, but how do you think about social entrepreneurship? Because I heard you say, right, you need to know the TAM, the total addressable market. I'm at Sloan right now. I'm getting a mid-career MBA. And hopefully to do recruitment but there's certain things we're tackling, improving recruitment of diverse participants into clinical trials.
Major problem.
And, so that's, the fact is that, as far as we can tell, if we can help, the fiscal incentives are aligned really with the AMCs, primarily academic medical centers, who depend on grant money. Although often the patients who can get to the academic medical centers, by the time you're focusing on that group, you're already not focusing on the marginalized. So it's sort of how I don't know that I have a very direct question, but when you're trying to grapple this huge complex problem where the incentive is really ethics and social good, and the financial incentives are a little bit harder to unearth, and or the financial incentives actually reinforce the structural barriers that we know exist.
Exactly.
What do you do with that?
It's a phenomenal question, and something I think about all the time. First of all, congratulations. It's phenomenal being a pediatrician and getting an MBA. You will be one of the people that changes the future of healthcare, because I think understanding how to play on both sides of the ball is the greatest value that you can give to healthcare entrepreneurship. So,
thank you. And I have an MPH too, because I'm just a glutton for her.
So now you're playing three sides of the ball, right? It's better to have that unique perspective. But the way I take the question, correct me if it's not sort of what we're thinking, but I think it's really interesting. I think about it all the time. So if you're trying to tackle a problem like diversity, inclusion in clinical trials, major problem, right? And I've seen that in 2 diseases now. So multiple myeloma was a rare blood cancer that actually affected the Black community more than any other ethnicity group, right? But that is not how our 1,000 patient longitudinal genomic study looked. It wasn't representational of the true population. That clinical trials were not representational of the true population of those with disease. We see the same thing in epidermolysis bullosa. And next door to you at Harvard Business School, I'm part of a group to the Kraft Precision Medicine Accelerator, and we're actually now, it's leading CEOs of medical research organizations, and this is our topic for 2021, right, is diversity and inclusion.
Are you judging? Can you vote us as top? I'm
absolutely.
kidding.
Absolutely. Please follow up and send me a message or
yeah, for sure.
I'd love to get your perspective. But the way to kind of get back to your question, when you're trying to, so we know it's a massive problem. I've seen it personally over the course of 2 diseases. We're addressing it high level with the likes of Michael J. Fox Foundation, American Cancer Society. It's this small group of CEOs. This is exactly what we're talking about. but to get to, I think the specific part of your question, which I think is a good one. So what's the business model to do that? We know it's the right thing to do. We know it's the ethical thing to do. Where the economics that match the ethics, right? And I think about this all the time, and I think it comes down to some decision points that are important ones. So am I best suited to start a nonprofit to address this, which brings its unique opportunities as well as unique challenges? Am I best suited to start a fully for-profit company to solve this problem, this issue? Or is there something in between, which is, perhaps a for-profit company, but it's a B Corp or it's an impact investment fund, right? And so those are kind of the three buckets, I think, right? And there's different value propositions for each, obviously. If for the nonprofit, you're not getting into it to generate shareholder return on investment, right? You're getting into it to really solve the problem. And that's good because you can remain altruistic, right? And
in theory, although even then I've had some experiences.
Well, yeah, exactly. There's also tainted altruism and effective altruism and, all these concepts that people are really talking about now, which is great. But, fundraising is a challenge. There's lots of work and lots of great causes. As a startup nonprofit, that is certainly an uphill battle. So then you look at, is there a business model for this? Are there economics that can match the ethics of doing the right thing? I think it's more challenging than just starting a nonprofit and saying this is our mission because we want to do good, to create a business model. But I think the hard work to create the business model makes it more fundable. And I think, so when we talk about impact investing, right, healthcare is perfectly suited for impact investing. And for those that may or may not know, how do we define impact investing? So impact investing is for-profit funds, for-profit VC and investing, but there's some social good and mission. Now there's no global group regulating what's social good or not, right? We think we know, and this is kind of part of the growth curve of impact investing in general. But there are impact investors out there. And it's interesting when you look at the statistics and data, healthcare is the smallest fraction of the areas of impact investing, right? So it's more focused on sustainability, climate change, food sourcing, agriculture, right? Which seems a bit backwards. Healthcare, if you can save lives, if you can extend lives, what better social impact is that to create a social impact investment fund? I think the mistake that people have made with impact. So say you start a company and you say, the market for this, it's not a nonprofit. We're not going to go traditional VCs, but we're going to look for these impact investors. The good thing is impact investors are focused on a mission, and many big portfolios, whether that's, a larger, private equity or investment funds portfolio or an individual investor's portfolio, you're seeing that percentage carved out more for impact investing, right? It's still not 25% of their portfolio, and many times it's not 10, but maybe there's 5% of their portfolio for impact investing. But what I've learned going down this path, even an impact investor is not going to invest because they're going to feel great about it. There still has to be a return on investment. There still has to be a value proposition that they're going to get their money back. Their time horizon may be a little more flexible and maybe a little better about it, but it's good, but they still want a return on investment. I think that's the biggest mistake that those pitching impact investments are, is that, hey, we get some leeway because we're doing good. It's actually the opposite. We've proven a way to generate a return on investment for an investor, but not only are we generating similar returns for the other things in your portfolio, but hey, we're also doing good. That is a way to be appealing to investors. And so I think, where does that lead us, right? Even if we know it's the ethically right thing to do, to have diversity and inclusion in clinical trial recruitment, and even genomic studies, right, which is incredibly important for clinical trial operators and biotech companies. We have to push ourselves as entrepreneurs to also find the right business model, right? And so I don't know if that fully answers your question. I could talk to you about it forever, by the way. It's an interesting.
No. And I just sent you my info, so I'd love to connect after, if you don't mind. But because I think and then I will cede the floor to whomever wants. We're thinking about actually trying to find a way to improve the onboarding process and be a consultative service to AMCs in a culturally respectful way, and with raised concordance of our staff to promote better acceptance of clinical trials.
That's brilliant. And just to give you a quick example, and we certainly can continue the conversation offline, I'll give you a specific example to our work at EB Research Partnership. So, the group was started by parents, right, who wanted to quite simply save their children's life. They want their kids to live longer than 13 years old and 30 years old, right? but it was with business thinkers and business leaders. So, the debate in the beginning is same thing. Do we start a nonprofit or do we start a fund? Right? Because we know we're going to fund clinical research, de-risk early stage investments. We're basically already angel investors, right? And the founders at that time said, and these are the questions you have to ask yourself as parents. Their mandate was different. So, when you have a company, so is your mandate, right? Meaning that I have to generate a return on investment first, and I have to do right by my investors. And the founders at that time worried that, let's say we have a decision point, this technology, this gene editing technology has the potential to cure the disease. The probability is low, but if we can do this and invest in this, and if it works, we can actually cure this disease. Well, the parent in me says, let's put it in our portfolio and take a gamble here, right? Because if it means the potential to cure my kid's life, I want to fund that as part of the portfolio, as opposed to something that's just going to be a topical treatment that makes the wound heal slightly faster, right? But the investor mindset's different, because now I'm just doing simply the math. That probability is too low for me to make that investment to potentially generate a return on investment, so I can't do it. So at the time, they didn't want that conflict. So you can see how the two different models can play out. They didn't want the conflict of what they set out to do from a mission perspective, and having to serve the needs of stakeholders and investors. Now, this can evolve over time. So for example, that was 10 years ago. Today, we've invested in enough through a venture philanthropy model, where our first mandate is fund things that will treat and cure the disease. But then our second mandate is make good business deals. So if these things are commercialized, we'll generate a return on investment to the foundation, again, to fund more research until we cure the disease. First mandate, again, treatments and cures. Second, an economic return. If it's full on business, you flip those, right? Or impact investment, economic return, and then we'll do good or treatments and cures. Now, but we've kind of shifted that because we've been successful under a philanthropy model. We've generated a significant amount of capital and revenue from venture philanthropy for the foundation. So that's why in the last 2 years, we can starting our own companies, right? So we're moving a little more in that direction, where we're starting our own companies. We put management teams in place. We take a significant equity share, still under a nonprofit model. Well, I can kind of tell you two lenses into the future now, because we have a portfolio of equity and IP and companies that we've started. Is that the best model, to have, companies and equity in companies sit on the balance sheet of a nonprofit organization? Probably not. So now we're starting to say, can we spin those companies out into a for-profit investable fund, call it impact fund or an EB holding company or whatever you want, because now we have an attractive portfolio for an outside investor to come in, advance these treatments to approvals, but also make money because we have good assets now. So it can also evolve over time, right? And so we're a hybrid, right? We're starting companies, we're launching investable funds, but we have a nonprofit arm. So there's also models that can do both. Same thing, I'm starting a company with Amazon. We're funding under a nonprofit model, but we're proving the use case in EB, but we're building it in a way that it can scale to the 7,000 rare diseases that impact 10% of the global population. That's 400 million people, right? So there's a business. So let's prove it for our disease under a philanthropic model and a nonprofit model, but let's do product development from the beginning, that we are just a use case for a bigger addressable market that could have significant economic impact as a for-profit company, right? So that's super
helpful. And I think that you just touched upon also the other thing, and I said I promised I was going to see the floor, but I was like, about the MVP versus the scaling. And that to me is always the tension, because like exactly what you just said, that's like, if you think big, you really eventually want it to expand.
Exactly.
And yet initially you have to do an MVP.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point. And I'll use, the current platform I'm building with Amazon, exactly to your point, right? So if I funded this under a nonprofit model, and my scope was make a great technology platform for EB patients, what happens when I prove that case? I have to go back to the drawing board to redevelop a product for all of rare disease, versus, to your point, having the vision and foresight to say, to engineers and the architecture of this, I want to build this so when we're done, I can pivot the next day to any rare disease. So it's kind of product development. The way I think about it is, from day one, I want to build a rare disease platform. I just want EB as a disease to be first off the runway, so it's mission fit for us, accomplishes our first mandate, right, of treatment cures for the disease. but also keeps in mind our second mandate, which is economic return, business models, scalability, and ultimately sustainability, right? Because if you're a patient advocacy group or a nonprofit medical research organization, like 95% never cross the $1 million threshold, right? Because they're galas, fundraising, dial for dollars, social media asks. So what we're doing is disruptive because we are creating a new business model that we still depend on the traditional sources of fundraising from a nonprofit, but it's eased because we have revenue coming in from different areas, including venture capital investments and our own companies, right? So it also helps sustain organizations as well, which I think is important.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I look forward to chatting more. It's the things that I think about often, and it sounds like you do as well. So look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.
Sorry, by the way, if you can hear my daughters in the background, I have 4 daughters, so the future is female. But yeah, I don't know if you can hear them in the background or not. They're participating.
If anyone else doesn't have questions, I can move on to the next question. But feel free to write them in the chat as well. I was wondering if you could share some of the challenges or even failures you faced in creating this healthcare business model. You talked a little bit about how to choose a model and what kind of path to take, but once you actually start, what are some of the major challenges?
I think, and this is very pertinent this year, one of the challenges I found, which again, I think is very on theme for this weekend, technological innovation, big data innovation in healthcare. So, when we came up with this concept and this vision to build a new patient data platform, partnering with, AWS and Amazon, right? I approached AWS about the idea. They were excited. We started building this together. And, my background is a business background, right? And so we have a consortium of, academic medical centers working in EB, right? And so I think one of the lessons learned is I made the assumption that everyone's going to be excited about this because we've got such a great technology partner. We've got this, wonderful vision. It's going to completely transform the landscape for what we care about as a medical research organization, but also clinicians care about, which is, treatments and cures for their patients. So I think what I learned was the communication of technological innovation to all stakeholders is incredibly important, and involving those stakeholders as soon as possible, even in product development and UX and UI, right? So I think rather than showing up to say, hey, academic medical centers, we've built this great technology, aren't you so excited about it? When it comes to technological disruption, the stakeholders have to actively have a role, right? And whatever that role means depends on the company and what you're developing. So one of my lessons learned, and I think a challenge, is I probably got too far along, even though it was quick, rapid iteration, agile methodology. We built the MVP in 8 weeks. Like we built an entire patient platform in 8 weeks with Amazon Envision Engineering, which is like the SEAL Team 6 of Amazon engineers. I made the mistake of moving too fast and coming to the table with a solution for these academic medical centers. And I think my lesson learned, especially with healthcare, there is a infrastructure of academic medicine that is set up, rightfully so, and those of you pediatricians and others on the line, to be cautious, to be skeptical, to protect patient privacy, to protect from malpractice, right? It's very different than, what a technology company would say, a famous one of, we're going to just break things and worry about it later, right? Like that's how the biggest technology company in the world has been developed. That is counter to the infrastructure and process and system that's set up in academic medicine, right? So I think one of my learnings that I would share with this group, because I think it's important as we develop technology products for healthcare, we have to understand the end user. For us, it's a patient. We also have to understand stakeholders. So what I would do differently is before I even did a rapid product build and an MVP, I would have went, to a key subset of academic medical center researchers first and said, this is the vision. This is what we're building. What are your thoughts? What are your concerns? And you think about a clinical trial or any sort of medical research, my hypothesis starts out with that my hypothesis is wrong. Right. And I need to prove why it's right. And I think I would have taken that approach to technological development, which is rather than me showing up and saying, hey, I've got this great solution, 20 hospitals, let's go. We're ready to go. Are you ready to jump in this car and we'll go really fast and do a great thing for patients. How I would do it differently is say, this is the idea. We want you part of it. These are the problems that I see. What are the problems that you see? How can we work on solving these problems together so that you feel safe and secure, and that it doesn't disrupt the things that you need to do in academic medical centers? So I think that's incredibly important when developing healthcare technologies, is to get the buy-in of stakeholders. Patients, especially for a rare disease, they just want to do anything they can to cure their child's disease or cure their own illness as quickly as possible. So I think really focusing on academic medicine, clinicians, researchers, getting their buy-in before you go and develop a product is incredibly important. I think, also understanding where your product or your company fits in with the ecosystem of healthcare, because we're a bit in this boom period, right? And it's not a coincidence why this hackathon is themed this way, right? Big data in healthcare, AI, machine learning, interpreting genomic information, this boom. And we've seen Moore's law, right? The doubling over of technology even faster. So the boom we're seeing in healthcare data and technology is faster than the boom of the internet, right? And costs go down. So, just 10 years ago, millions of dollars to sequence one person's genome. Today it's $1,000. So we're in this rapid boom period. And so how do you sort through the noise? Where does my company or product fall in the ecosystem? There's some pretty big, sluggish behemoth pillars of our current healthcare system, whether we like them or not. EHRs and the few big companies, insurance and payers, devices that currently exist in hospital rooms or that are part of clinical trials. So, am I innovating to replace those things? Am I innovating to supplement those things? Where do I fall within the current technological ecosystem? Because it's different than designing an app for an iPhone that everybody has, right? They're very specific companies and very specific components of our current healthcare ecosystem. So I think it's really important to always ask, where do I fit in? And even hearing some of the pitches today, that's been a lot of the questions. Is this software? Is this hardware? How do you plan on working with the big 3 EHR companies? So I think that's really important. I think the last thing that I'll say of, what to think about when starting a company in healthcare, trust in healthcare is probably the most important thing. And I would argue that healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship requires a much more intense focus on trust in every sense of the word. So for us, the trust of the patient community. Are you doing right by patients? Are you being transparent with patients? Are you communicating to patients? Because the biggest risk, and we've seen this, there's many examples of healthcare companies, even big ones, that have failed because they don't build that trust of the patient community, which, regardless of whoever you think your customer is, if you're building a company in healthcare, it should be patients. It should be to make patients' lives better. So from the first day that you launch with a pitch deck or a company, what are you doing to ensure that patients trust you as a company, as a brand, as a technology? Because it's the same as your character. It becomes the defining factor of success on if patients will invest in you. And I don't mean just economically or financially. Will they invest in being part of your company to make it a great solution for healthcare? So starting with the patient and thinking about ways that you can ensure that your company builds trust with patients, because probably there's more bad press today than good press about patient data and patient data privacy and what's done with patient data, right? So I think the good companies and the ones that succeed, that really truly innovate in healthcare, start with thinking about the needs, desires, trust, and faith of the patient community.
I have a question that is not very related to healthcare, but I see that your undergraduate years, you had a degree in philosophy. I was wondering, how did that play into a role with you getting a business degree in the future? How did that affect your journey in healthcare technology?
Yeah, thank you. There actually, so Harvard Business Review last year wrote an article about. So first of all, I always make the joke, like, I'm a philosophy major, why did I do that? And I argue with myself on why I chose a philosophy major, and I talk around in circles until I get to the same place I started, right? But there was an article in Harvard Business Review last year that actually argued that liberal arts degrees are back. The article was like, hey, liberal arts degrees are back and they have an importance. in an era of AI and machine learning, right, to stay on topic for what we're doing this weekend, and why. What's philosophy? Philosophy is ethics, logic, debate, moral frameworks, right? And so while much of AI and machine learning and interpretation of data is computational and engineering, zeros and ones and how we formulate them and interpret them and analyze them, that's the work that we can train computers to do. And we're increasingly doing that in healthcare, right? Machine learning and AI with big data. So who is training the machine learning algorithms? And what are the philosophies and ethics and morals that drive how we are training AI, right? So are we training AI with a moral bias because the person that wrote the program has moral bias? How are we building healthcare programs that, to our previous point, are actually, solving problems like disparities and inequity in healthcare? How are we designing AI programs that help clinical trials proportionally look more like the populations that they serve, right? Are we asking the right questions? And, to be honest with you, when I did a philosophy degree, I never thought it would have, a benefit in healthcare. I kind of thought I may have wasted 4 years of my undergraduate degree, reading the great thinkers of the philosophical era, but what I came to realize, the benefit of many liberal arts degrees is, in philosophy, what we call the Socratic method, right? Asking questions, question everything. And I think questioning everything, including yourself, which is really hard to do, especially as a new CEO or a new co-founder or founder of a company, is what makes great entrepreneurs and what makes great business leaders. Continuing to say, could I build this better? Could I build this faster? What am I missing? Have I talked to the right customers? Is my strategy right? I want to pressure test it. So I think that ability to ask questions and be Socratic as an entrepreneur is really incredible. And there's a famous example. You guys remember, what were those? They were like the machines that you drove around. They were like, had 2 wheels on them, and like cops ended up doing them. Do you know what I'm talking about? What were those? What's that?
Segways?
Segways, exactly. So that's a perfect example of why philosophy should have been proven. So the entrepreneur behind the Segway designed like a kidney functioning machine, like designed 5 or 6 products that were all multi-billion products. This famous entrepreneur, everything he touched turned to gold, right? And when he designed the Segway, it was great technology, right? It's fascinating. You watch somebody on a Segway, it's beautiful to watch, it's innovative and different. But what he didn't do, he was so caught up on being a great entrepreneur and having so many hits, some of the biggest investors in the world got behind the Segway, right? As a product, but it failed. From a commercial perspective and an economic perspective, it failed. And you can draw a direct line to why it failed because of the lack of asking questions. So the entrepreneur had so many hits that he built that, and he never talked to customers. He never talked to addressable markets. He never questioned, am I on the right track? And so what you came with, and Google Glass is kind of an example of this as well, right? Although that's kind of changing, is a great technology product without any insight into consumer behavior and feedback on if they'll actually use it, because the Segway wasn't practical for a large addressable market to, roam around in their backyard or their neighborhood on a Segway, right? So philosophy background has taught me to question everything, to debate things with others, whether it be your team, your co-founders, friends and family. Like, I welcome critiques and I welcome debate, the same way we do with philosophical argument. And then logic and reasoning. I think it's great to have emotion and passion as an entrepreneur. It's probably one of the largest determinants of success for entrepreneurs. Again, when I get knocked down, or I fail, or I get told no, or my idea doesn't work, or I had a bad day, what is going to make that entrepreneur dust themselves off and keep going, right? That resiliency, that grit, like we talk about, and Angela Duckworth's Grit is a wonderful book on this if you guys haven't read it. But what makes great entrepreneurs is just simply not giving up. And even if you think of famous inventors like Edison, right? I mean, he had thousands and thousands of patents, thousands and thousands of failures, right? To have the 5 or 6 inventions that we all talk about that make him a great inventor, right? So that grit and that resiliency is so important. But so the passion gets you through that, right? But I think you also have to apply logic and reasoning. Am I too close to this, right? Am I making sure this is logical as much as I believe in my idea? Because as entrepreneurs, sometimes we fall so much in love with our idea that we put blinders on, right? And I think good entrepreneurs find that balance of being passionate and in love with my idea, but not only being willing to hear critiques and logically evaluate, is my go-to-market strategy song, is my business model right? Am I after the right market? But actively seek that out, with healthy debate and discourse from those that you trust and mentors to say, prove me wrong or prove me right, I think is incredibly important. Let me ask you, Vanessa, do you have a liberal arts background? Is that why you asked the question?
Yeah, I'm currently a first year student at Yale University, and I'm taking classes in all kinds of areas. But I do plan to be a biomedical engineering major, and obviously, like to be involved in health tech, I don't think I need a degree in engineering specifically. And because I'm interested in so many different things, I was wondering just like how everything can play a role in health tech.
Now I'll try to find this article and send it around, but it was interesting because the argument was like, you can replace a lot of jobs with AI and machine learning, right? And we'll see that. But, actually there will be a demand of liberal arts degrees, like philosophy and humanities to kind of think through what are the things we can't train a computer to do, right? So it's a great question and it's interesting. And, probably the best advice is, especially, where you are in your journey with academics, explore it all, right? And see what resonates and try to find synergy between those different subject areas that can impact one another to be a great entrepreneur, be a great leader.
Thank you.
I have another question about when you're thinking about startup, because I heard you saying like, you guys take a healthy equity stake so that you can have like the appropriate payoff. But when you're on the side of creating the company, how do you think of that balance of like, you obviously don't have cash initially, you want to recruit talent. There's often like 2 or 4 co-founders who kind of have the vision, and then you recruit talent. So how do you think about dividing up that equity stake and, being that, founder that you mentioned who has the ability to hear like where you're wrong and like, but at the same time, also having that belief in yourself and like, because I feel like sometimes people who are in the C-suite, whether in startups or generally, have like a level of paranoia.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, by nature, I'm not a paranoid person. And I have had to like develop that as a physician, be like, every baby could be doing something terrible without me realizing it.
Okay.
But by nature, I prefer to be more optimistic. And I just took a negotiation class and I came out in like the top 5 for making people feel good when they negotiate with me while still getting a good deal. But it's like, so I guess I'm just trying to figure out like, how much should you try to maintain control? How much should you share equity? How do you kind of strategize about that?
Yeah, it's so great. I mean, then this is like wading into behavioral economics, right? Like the mix of behavior and science. And, Richard Thaler, of course, just won the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics as a new concept, like where do money and mind meld, right? Which makes a good negotiation, right? It's as much personal and psychological as it is financial. To get specific, I think the way I think about it from an investor perspective, to address the paranoia that you mentioned, investors and VCs get paranoid when there is too much equity already accounted for, right? So I'll give you a perfect example. If there are 5, and it's interesting because with hackathons, right, any of these become companies, you're starting with 5 team members, right? So it's natural to say, hey guys, whatever we do here, everybody gets 20%. So I always use this as a little thought experiment, right? So 5 team members, we're going to start this company, we all get 20% equity. So why does that make an investor have anxiety, to use your word, right, around investing in that company? Well, let's think about it. Say you're one of those 5, right? And look, I agree, everybody brings value to the table, but the question is, who's the person or 2 people that are really going to lead that to success despite what happens? And, what can you not hire for, right? I think is a question that an investor thinks for. So if a company starts with 5 members, they split the equity equally, the reality is that that's very rarely the right thing to do, right? Of just splitting it down the line and splitting it down the middle. One person has the idea, the vision, the ability to execute, probably deserves more equity. So why is that scary for an investor? Okay, so what happens now when I'm the first funder and then we go we're getting ready, we're going to gear up for a Series A and go raise some significant capital. I have to make equity available. Let's say I'm just going to split the equity, right, to make a new half of it available. So you as a founder, the second that I go need to raise more capital for a Series A, all of a sudden, we have to split your stock and your equity so I can go raise money for the company. You're diluted down to 10% at Series A. So me as an investor, how do I know I'm keeping you motivated and getting up out of bed in the morning for 10%, right? And then great news, this company is wildly successful, and it's because of you, because you're this co-founder and this great idea. Let's go do a Series B. We're going to need significant capital for Series B, so we're actually going to have to split this into a quarter. Well, now your equity is down to 2.5%. And that is a very realistic scenario for successful companies. The more capital you raise, founder shares get diluted, unless they're non-dilutive, which is very rare in an early stage company to secure that. So, 2 years in a capital raise, all of a sudden you went from 20% down to 2.5. What's your motivation to still invest in this company? And now I've lost my leader as an investor, or quite clearly anybody, right, that has the majority equity to now run this company. And me as an original investor, all of a sudden I'm left with the bag of having the majority equity stake, but I don't have the time to run the company because I've got 50 other investments, right? So I think that's where, just to use a specific example and to use the words in your question, the investor anxiety, equity decisions are probably from a business. Well, look, your go-to-market strategy, your addressable market, your overall business plan are incredibly important, but equity is probably the most important question that entrepreneurs have to address. That's harder to foresee the implications of it down the line, right? Because if you want your company to succeed, it's going to take more capital to do that. So just being aware of the dilutive nature of startup companies, I think, should encourage entrepreneurs to negotiate and use negotiating skills with the teams that start up these companies to say, look, everybody, clearly this was my idea. This is what I expect of you moving forward. I'm going to work night and day for this. You guys are going to get salary when we get to this point. So therefore, I'm going to take this larger equity stake, but I'm going to give you guys this equity stake and guarantee you this salary up front and ongoing. So kind of having those negotiations rather than doing the easy thing, which is let's split this equity down the middle.
All right. What do you consider is that healthy equity stake?
I mean, it's hard to say, depends on the entrepreneurs and the company and the founder. I think, for an investor, you want to know a sweetheart deal is if the entrepreneur has 100% equity in the company, that's the ideal situation, right? If two entrepreneurs have 100% equity in the company, whether it's 50-50, 70-30, that's still a pretty good deal. I think where investors start to get nervous is, are there 7 people before I even put a penny into this and it's pre-capital, right? That, then it's well, we got a lot of people to deal with. We're trying to carve out returns for investors and eventually institutional investors. In some ways, you are limiting the ability to raise capital when you have that many investors, right? So I think in a perfect world, it's 1 or 2 founders have the majority of equity. That's a great situation for venture capitalists and investors. I think once you can have 5 or 6 maybe people that have equity stakes, but you really want to see that at least the majority of those co-founders or early stage employees, whatever they may be, have lower equity thresholds. And you want to know, you really want to know that a true founder or co-founders have the majority of that equity, because again, as an investor, I know that everybody's equity is going to be diluted over time, but I need to know that founder, who's the reason I'm investing because I believe it's going to succeed, is going to have reason to get out of the bed in the morning for their equity stake.
I'm so going to quote you in future negotiations. I'm going to be well, it's not me. I was just told by an investor.
Yeah. There's a great, I wish I had it in front of me. There's a great case. It might be a Harvard Business School case where it's basically of why you don't split equity. It was a nanotechnology company. It might have even been in healthcare. And there were 6 PhD academics that founded the company, and they were, brilliant minds, but they didn't have business backgrounds. And there was clearly somebody that should have been the founder and did more work, but they were, academics. So they said, hey, let's just split this 6 ways. And then you can see within a couple of years, they were all diluted down to under 2%, and they're just what happened? We had this great idea that 6 of us owned, and in 2 years, we now have nothing. So it's a great illustrative example of what can happen when you structure it that way.
We are out of time, For those who joined late, this video will be posted on the CBIT YouTube. I want to thank Michael for coming and talking to us. It was wonderful. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did. And let's hope everyone has a good weekend hacking. And I can't wait to see the final results.
Thank you. Best of luck, everybody. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing the presentations tomorrow.
Thanks.
So much.
I had no idea this was recorded. Otherwise, they would have done my hair. Oh, well, bye.
Everybody.